Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my reviews of both The Last Stand and A Haunted House. I have my notes in front of me so I could stay on point. But let's start with The Last Stand. Now, I really like this movie. I was really disappointed that it flopped at the box office. Really, I thought what stood out the most about it is it's perfectly paced. It's not in a hurry to get itself over with, but it always inserts the action scenes in the proper places, so you never go on too long without some sort of car chase or shootout, but at the same time it's not just that kind of stuff either. It balances the action with the more character oriented sequences, and it also never plays all of its cards too early. It builds up to a spectacular finale, and the finale is definitely the best sequence in the whole movie. So the action continues to get better and better as the film progresses. The action is nicely framed, but it's very simplistic, and that's part of the reason why I believe it bombed. When you take a movie like, and this is probably a bad example because it bombed too, Dread, there was a lot more put into the actual action scenes themselves in a movie like Dread. There's a lot more style. They use editing and camera work in a very flashy way, so every frame of the action scene is pretty memorable, so you can make a good trailer out of that. But when it comes to here, it's relatively simple. Just shootouts, car chases, a lot of violence, which you obviously can't put in the trailers, but it really just relies on Arnold Schwarzenegger shooting something, or character driving and causing cars to flip over. It looks really good. I don't want to undermine how awesome it is. In fact, it's much more of a throwback to the '80s style of action, which was more about the person who was creating all of this mayhem over the mayhem itself. So, for example, when you watch, Stallone in one of his earlier action movies, it's awesome because Stallone's doing everything. It's not the explosions themselves, even though obviously that really helps. But I felt that The Last Stand did a really good job in that regard. I loved, as I said, how all the action scenes were framed, and they're edited very well too. The editing it's tight enough to where it magnifies the tension, but it never becomes incomprehensible, which is one of the big problems I have with today's action movies. Is it seems like the camera work is always so shaky and the editing is so tight that you can't really make out what's going on. But The Last Stand did it wonderfully, so no complaints there. I did feel that the score was a bit of a letdown. The director of this film, he's a pretty cool Korean guy. He did The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, I Saw the Devil, and A Tale of Two Sisters, all of which I really loved. A Tale of Two Sisters was a Ring knockoff that was very, very effective. In fact, I'd say it's probably the best of the Ring knockoffs, and it's not even really a knockoff. I can't really describe that movie any other way. But the music in that movie was very poetic. I mean, it stays with me even now, even though I watched it once, and that was quite a few years ago. The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, it was probably, I don't think it's his best movie. It's probably the weakest of his films, but it's actually much more stylized than this is, even though it's also sort of a Western and an action movie. But the score, once again, the music really stood out. I could still remember various tracks in that film. And then I Saw the Devil, which is probably his best film in my opinion. That also had music that has stayed with me to this day. I cannot remember any of the tracks present in The Last Stand, so that's not a good thing. So that was my main disappointment with this movie. The humor, I thought, mixed in really well with the action scenes too. Much like the action, a lot of this I don't think really carried very well in the trailers. When you take a comedy like, I don't know, Ted, there's enough one-liners and enough contained jokes that you don't need to see the full scene for those moments to be funny. In this film, it seemed like they relied a lot on Johnny Knoxville's character, and he's not really in the movie that much, so it seemed like it was just too stupid and silly. But the funnier parts really do require the proper context. You need to see either the scene before them or the scene as a whole, instead of just seeing that one little clip they show in the previews. But there are a lot of really funny moments, and that I think helped make The Last Stand exceptional. I was constantly laughing, but I was constantly enjoying the action, and the pacing I thought really was helped by the funnier moments that keep things from becoming too dark. The film does have some pretty grisly moments, but the lightheartedness really helped with that, and it never betrayed the tone either, at least in my opinion. Is it perfect? No. There's a lot of things that could have been explored more, but at the same time, I'm almost glad they didn't. For example, I never understood what made the villain so bad. He's apparently on death row, so he had to do something horrible, and he says that he killed his niece or whatever, but that was described by him as self-defense, so I don't think that would be why he would be on death row. I just presumed he was some sort of drug lord, but I felt that they could have done more with him, so you hated him much more, that you knew why this guy had to be stopped. And then the relationships could have been fleshed out much more. Like, there's this one guy who's kind of the town drunk, who was a former war veteran, who had a relationship with one of the female deputy, and they had some past that's sort of covered, but not much, and of course they fall back in love once he decides to help them out. That was just kind of conventional, and they don't spend enough time on it for it to really be effective. But at the same time, if they did develop all these subplots or characters much more, it could have really harmed the pacing. It could have made the film seem sort of bloated, and once again, I believe that the pacing was The Last Stand's greatest strength, so I'm not going to criticize it too much for that. Arnold Schwarzenegger's acting is a little rusty, but the good parts make it worth him returning. I'm so glad to see him back. He has so much charisma, and even though some of his delivery was pretty stiff and awkward, I don't care. Arnold was never about the acting. He was always about his charisma, his presence, and they have a lot of fun, pretty much making fun of the fact that he's old now and he can't do everything that he used to. And I thought they also did a good job at. Nobody feels totally invulnerable. People get injured, they get winded, and especially when it comes to Arnold Schwarzenegger, you really feel that this is not the invincible action god that he used to be. He just happens to be a badass old guy by now, and that really, I thought, made it a little more suspenseful, even though, once again, this movie is much more lighthearted. So definitely give Last Stand a chance. I think it's worth seeing in theaters, maybe even full price if you're a huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. Even though I like him, I've always been more of a Stallone guy, so I wouldn't call myself a diehard fan, but I've always enjoyed his movies, although it's been so long since I've seen most of them that I honestly can't remember how I felt about a few. Like, in the past few years, I've watched the first two Terminators and Predator, and I loved all those movies, but it's been so long since I've seen Commando and I don't know, Last Action Hero, and a few others that he's done that I've grown up with. I remember enjoying them all, but I need to give them a look again. But The Last Stand is definitely a good movie and worth your time. A Haunted House is not. Now, if you followed me long enough, you might know that I have an unhealthy addiction to spoof movies. Pretty much what will happen is I'll watch them, and almost immediately I will phase out the bad parts, remember the good parts, and I believe that these movies generally do have at least a few genuinely funny moments. And then it seems like the movie will age better in my head. So I remember when I was reviewing, I believe, Kick-Assia, I mentioned liking Epic Movie. Well, I really felt that at the time, but then I watched it again afterwards, and I remembered everything I disliked about it, but I hadn't remembered any of that when I had actually said that, and it seems like most spoof movies have that effect on me. So I've been trying to be much stronger, even though I feel so compelled to watch them all. I do a much better job now remembering what I disliked about them, and there is a lot to dislike about Haunted House. I have a theory. Comedy in general relies a lot on ad-libbing. So if you actually look at the scripts of most comedies, they're generally not very good. It's the comedians and the actors who make it better based on what they just think of off the top of their heads. Now, Haunted House really does feel like it was comprised of mostly ad-libbing, despite the fact that it claims there were 2 writers on this project. I do not believe that. And what I'm going to say here, and I have to look at my notes even more so because there's a lot more that's difficult to describe. I suspect that they edited the movie, took all the best material, and realized that they had only 15 minutes of watchable footage. So what they did is they took all the footage they filmed, stuff that should have been kept as bloopers, and that was pretty much the final cut of the movie. The reason why I believe this is every scene seems to go on way too long of stuff that I'm sure was funny in their head, or may have even been funny on set, but they just didn't carry on very well on screen. And there's this one part, though, that really stood out to me when Cedric the Entertainer, he shows up, and he's this priest who's also a convict, and he's looking at the girl from outside the room, and he's making just all these observational quips that some are funny, some are not. But what he keeps doing is he makes a joke, and then he'll have an edit, a very noticeable edit, where he's still standing in the same place, then he makes another joke, and then they'll have another edit, and once again he hasn't moved at all, and he just keeps making these jokes. There's these obvious edits between the jokes, and I was just wondering if they had only planned on maybe using one or two of those, but they go on like 10 times of just that. And I felt that so much of that probably wasn't intended to be there. They just could not decide, which joke they wanted to use, or they just didn't have enough material, so they had to pad it somehow, so they just used it all. And that was really glaring. And that really harms the pacing, which is shocking because this is not a long movie. I think it was like 87 minutes long. But I was kind of bored. And, even when it comes to most parodies that are done by those two directors that nobody likes, they usually have at least a handful of things that I really appreciate, whether it's in the jokes themselves, or one thing I do believe they're really good at is acquiring a strong lead who could perfectly emulate what they're parodying, and that to me, to a point, is going to at least help. But when it came to this movie, even though there were less groan-inducing moments, it was much more focused than most of their parodies. Like, Vampire Suck would have a scene where the Edward spoof shoots Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and I'm thinking, why was that necessary? Alice in Wonderland has nothing to do with vampires. This at least mostly focuses on the Paranormal Activity and the films that were inspired by that. The only one that really felt out of place was somebody made an I Know What You Did Last Summer reference. A little dated there, guys, but that I also suspect was probably ad-libbed, so I don't know. It's still not as bad as the Alice in Wonderland stuff. Otherwise, it just didn't feel like they could think of a whole lot of jokes to make when it comes to making fun of Paranormal Activity or all those movies. Instead, we get a lot of gay jokes, a lot of sex jokes, a lot of fart jokes, a lot of black jokes, and I'm always a little weirded out how these movies that are feature so many black actors, they almost seem to have a racist portrayal of their own race. Pretty much every negative stereotype you could think of that's been used against black people is present in this movie. It's also kind of misogynistic. And I usually don't point this stuff out because I believe when somebody accuses a movie of that, they're being a bit too liberal with the definition, but I couldn't help but wonder it while I was watching this film. It does not portray women or black people in a positive light, although I guess you could argue that doesn't portray anybody in a positive light, but I can see certain people getting offended by some of the jokes. Running out of breath. They have some weird subplots that I don't know where they came from. Like, there's this whole thing where these neighbors, they're swingers, and they're constantly hitting on Marlon Wayans and his girlfriend. Is that making fun of any specific horror movie? Granted, I have not seen every Paranormal Activity ripoff. I've actually actively avoided most of them, so I could be missing something, but that just felt totally irrelevant. Also, there's this whole thing with the dead dog in the beginning. It was kind of funny because in Wikipedia, they said something like it starts off with his girlfriend accidentally running over his dog, and we see Marlon Wayans react to in a hilarious manner or something like that. And I'm like, did the producers write this article on Wikipedia, or are they being sarcastic? It wasn't funny. It was really annoying. And another thing that I thought really hurt this was, some of the jokes are surprisingly low-key. I could actually see some of the situations occurring in a Paranormal Activity movie. For example, in the very beginning, Marlon Wayans is making fun of his girlfriend for having so much stuff, and he's getting her to confess that she's a hoarder. That's I could actually see somebody making a joke like that in real life, and I could see that maybe being in a Paranormal Activity movie, and that's too realistic compared to the more slapsticky stuff that happens later on. And then there are other scenes that aren't really funny at all, and they're not even really trying to be funny, I think. There's this whole bit where the ghost rapes the girlfriend in her sleep, and of course she has to like it, which is part of why I think it's misogynistic. Apparently Marlon Wayans hasn't figured out that ghost rape is still not funny based on his experiences from Scary Movie 2, okay. But so he's all bothered about that, and there are some there's legitimate tension between the two, and they have to start having arguments that are more uncomfortable than they are funny. So they really dropped the ball there, and in the end, it just really felt like they went into this movie with no script. It was just sort of half-baked, and there just wasn't enough material to make for a full-length feature film. Had it been like a 10-15 minute short film, it could have been amusing. And they didn't even make fun of the stuff that I wanted to see spoofed, like how come he's always filming, and the main character is kind of an asshole for sort of exploiting this whole situation, but they don't really deal with that much at all. So that was a waste. And it has a good cast. I think everybody involved has some comedic talent, but they're underused. It didn't seem like they had a whole lot of material to work with, and they just were ad-libbing, and some of it doesn't work. At times it is sort of unintentionally funny, like the guy who plays the gay psychic, who's kind of a pervert. He's constantly hitting on Marlon Wayans. He's saying all this stuff as Marlon Wayans is trying to push him out, and Marlon Wayans is obviously creeped out by this character, but at one point he starts cracking up. I don't think that was planned. I think that the actor was actually cracking Marlon Wayans up, and for some reason they decided to keep that. I don't know if that's true, but there are some things that I thought was sort of amusing, like when the main girl, she comes downstairs and she sees that her keys, which were once on the counter, are now on the floor, and she automatically presumes it's a ghost. Or I like how they replicate some of the scares from Paranormal Activity, like when he's filming, and for some reason the maid always seems to just pop up in front of the camera, and it is actually a decent jump. That kind of stuff cracked me up. And when they have the scene where all the furniture is suddenly gone and it just drops all over the floor, they did that pretty well. And it had some moments that were sort of amusing, but for the most part I did not laugh, and I don't think you should watch this in theaters. If you're like me and you're addicted to spoof movies, just wait until it comes out on DVD. And that's really all I have to say. So watch The Last Stand, don't watch A Haunted House. If you'd like to go to my website, I have a written review of 28 Weeks Later. I did not do written reviews of either of these films, so check that out. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, and I'll have my worst movies of 2012 list up soon. It's going to be scripted, and it's pretty funny, and I'm actually doing really well when it comes to the Critiquing the Critics script, so that will probably definitely be out next week. So that is all I have to say. I'll see you guys later. Everybody, this is Blake here, and I'm going to be reviewing both The Last Stand and A Haunted House. My kitty's just sitting there on the couch looking all adorable, but don't let those looks deceive you. She is really a mean bitch. I can guarantee that at some point during this video, she's probably going to want outside and is going to start yowling as loud as she can. That's really, really bad, and that cat already looks like she wants out. No, she's going to do it. Fuck. Pardon me. Go, kitty. Go.